to the Crafted Conversation with me, Marcus Sharrod, where we give consideration to the art of performance and development in the classroom or instructional environment on the coaching field for sports coaches, and consider a culture of performance where conversations will explore anything from instructional methods, teaching and learning, which is informed by educational and cognitive psychology, motivation theory, cognitive biases, designing programs of learning, the use of feedback and assessment, and also consider group dynamics and performance as well as individual performance. None of this can be explored without the lens of identity and storytelling and generating a sense of belonging within the cultural performance in which we exist. So, without further ado, we continue with today's crafted conversation. I'm here today with Jonathan Mumford, who has a distinguished career and now a very varied career in education, having taught French and Spanish for 15-16 years, about half of those as a head of department or even head of languages, and has more recently moved away from the sort of full-time teaching in schools and has a varied working life around consulting, speaking, delivering professional development for middle leaders, for languages professionals up and down the country, and as well as school improvement work that he does in the Liverpool area, and acting as a tutor on a skip course through Liverpool Hope University, working with our bright and best, hopefully, new young teachers that are coming into the profession. Something that, on the balance of more recent evidence, is an incredibly valuable job as we continue to kind of fight to bring the brightest and best into our great profession. So, Jonathan, I'll kick off. Can you give me something that recently, across the variety of things, what is it that's happened most recently that's kind of just underlined the value you place in education and imparting learning on others?
Morning, Marcus. Thanks very much for having me on today. Delighted to be with you. And thanks for the big build up there as well. When it comes to teaching and learning, I like to think of myself as a bit of a forward-thinking teacher. So I've been delving a little bit into the world of AI lately, which is quite exciting. And I was actually speaking to a teacher down in London quite recently, and she was telling me how she's been using AI in her lessons, in her language lessons, which really inspired me. And one thing that I think in language lessons that we struggle with a little bit is trying to find engaging resources for our students. And the teacher was explaining that through AI, there's a website called Lingo Teach that a lot of teachers use in languages. And through this website, you can devise your own text. So you can say to the students, right, what do you want to talk about? So you might say to the students, right, what we'll do is we'll have Kylian Mbappe talking about his last match last night, and you can then essentially just make your own story up. And what the teacher said she did was she got it all from the students. So essentially the students created their own resource, and automatically, because they created their own resource, they straight away they wanted to engage with that resource and try and pick out the key language and things like that, and actually find out what Kylian Mbappe's views were on his match last night. So that I think the future is, it's really exciting, especially for languages with AI. And I think we'll talk maybe a little bit about that a little bit later on, how to engage boys specifically. But just she said the reaction that the boys had from having the opportunity to create their own resource was a sight to behold. So I think it's something which is definitely something to explore over the next few years, definitely.
That's great. Thanks, Jonathan. And as you kind of alluded to there, the purpose of the conversation today, or certainly our central focus, is going to be around touching on potentially how audio feedback can be a powerful tool within our armory when it comes to varying our feedback up, as we know can be so valuable and actually have such an impact on teacher workload and the amount of time that we spend marking and feeding back to pupils.
Definitely.
but also focusing specifically perhaps on how we engage boys, particularly those boys in the sort of year 10, year 11, key stage 4, when they're hitting that peak adolescent phase. Out of interest, though, off the back of that lovely anecdote there, it's interesting, isn't it, from your subject, that Google came along and Google Translate came along and it totally changed everything. And now, with the potential of AI and various other kind of online tools, I wonder whether languages actually have never had it better in terms of really integrating pupils into what it is to speak, listen, write, read the language, as opposed to perhaps previous, when you would deliver a syllabus. Is
yeah. In my experience, I suppose it's a bit of a double-edged sword at the moment for language teachers, because AI is so advanced now. Because with Google Translate, you could see straight away when a student had used it, because there'd be certain errors in there, and the word order might be incorrect, or there'll be some strange words in there that they've never learned before. Whereas AI is so good now that, I've heard of sort of teachers giving homework to students, and students literally just typing into ChatGPT what the homework is, and then the whole piece of homework is produced for them. So there's very little interaction from the students. So I think it is a useful tool, but only if it's introduced very carefully and considerately into the classroom. So things like, I know that they're speaking to a number of teachers recently about it, that giving written homework is a no-no now. So we don't give any written homework, because all the students will do is just go on to ChatGPT, type in what the title of the homework is, and then spit out whatever they spit out. It just comes out, and they put that as their homework. So all written pieces done in class now. But there's definitely lots of scope for I think engagement's the key, really, and in particular, I think boys more than anything. I think the idea that boys can have a chat to, there's a website called character.ai where you can actually have a chat with Lionel Messi if you want to. Obviously, it's not really Lionel Messi, but you can ask him all about his family. You can ask him what he did last weekend, and he will give you that. He will actually say what he did last week, and it's all factual as well. So if you ask him how many brothers and sisters he's got in Spanish, then he will answer you in Spanish and say, I've got 3 brothers, 2 sisters, and he'll talk about his family. So it's just really exciting to sort of delve into. But again, I just think we do need to be very careful with it, I think, because the kids know a lot more than us, don't they? That's the problem. The kids are sort of one step ahead of us a lot of the time.
And that was, sorry, just so that I can put that into the notes, character.ai.
Yeah.
Fantastic. The aim is that we get on there one day.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, let's.
So do you use AI much in PE? Do you delve into that area?
It's a question. You know what we've got actually? We are from a practical perspective. I think it could be useful in generating. It's definitely been useful in generating things like what ChatGPT would kind of offer to us as a scheme of work for certain activities, or potentially use it. I mean, because ultimately it's just a repository of the internet, right? So if I ask for a practice that looks to specifically challenge, I don't know, a hip hinge movement or a squat pattern, then yeah, that has been interesting for us to be able to go, okay, what does that look like versus what we would deliver and what our experts at school in the strength and conditioning department would say. So that's been interesting. And from a classroom perspective, it's something we're sort of still exploring. I've got a member of the department who's kind of been tasked with that, and so it's we're trying to be on top with it.
Yeah.
But look, we have on a couple of occasions now, you've kind of mentioned boys, and boys are one of our focus areas today. So tell me, firstly, why do you feel there's a need to consider boys as their own entity at certain times within their educational career?
Well, I always think about, when the results come out in the summer, there's always a headline, isn't there, on the news, talking about the gender gap with boys. And I think it's been reduced ever so slightly over a number of years, but it's still something which exists and people talk about. But it always just seems to be brushed under the carpet at that. So we've accepted it's an issue. and then nothing ever seems to get done. I don't think on the ground, I'm sure a lot of research goes on around it, but I don't think actually on the ground we actually see any different approaches taking place in the classroom. So it's something which has always interested me. And I think in languages in particular, because the gender gap is quite large in languages, it's about 9 or 10% in terms of the passes at GCSE. So the difference between boys and girls is around 9% at the moment, I think. It used to be 11% a few years ago, which is a bit more than the sort of national standard, which I think is about 6.8%. So it's a little bit more of a concern in language. And I think it's actually quite high in PE as well, strangely, because you'd think it'd be the other way around, wouldn't you, in PE? Because boys are more enthusiastic in PE, aren't they? But I think it's around 8% in PE as well. So it's an accepted issue that's there, but I can't really see anything being done to address it, really. So it's something which is really interesting me. I did an NPQSL qualification about 5 or 6 years ago, and that was focused on a pilot project in my school around engaging boys in the revision process, because I always found that boys were always struggling to revise or knowing where to find things through maybe a little bit of disorganized approach. So it's always something which is interesting me. And I think that it is an issue, and you mentioned there about why do you think we sort of separate them? I think because boys have got different sort of characteristics, haven't they? And they've got different approaches. Girls seem to be more mature than boys. In my experience, I might be generalising here, but boys seem to be quite disorganised, especially around GCSE. So it's trying to support them in the right way. To ensure that they're able to give their best in their exams, because quite often it's things like disorganisation, or just having the incorrect approach to revision that is making the boys not perform as well as they should. Not necessarily a lack of knowledge, it's the application of that knowledge that sometimes they're struggling with.
Do you recognise or observe a difference between GCSE and A level, or Key Stage 4 to Key Stage 5 for boys at all?
I do in languages, yeah, because in languages, I think that if you're taking A level languages, there's an appreciation there that you're going to be speaking quite a lot of the foreign language in A level. I mean, most of the lessons are conducted solely in the foreign language. It's I always find boys are on a bit of a sort of circular sort of pathway, really, when it comes to languages, because they start off in year 7 really enthusiastic, sort of wanting to take the lead in lessons, really wanting to put the hand up, get involved, have an interactive experience. And then when grammar and more difficult aspects of the language are introduced, they start to struggle, and quite often they get turned off. But then if they take it at A level, then obviously they're quite enthusiastic about the subject anyway, and because it's so sort of fake but based around the spoken language, they seem to come to the fore again because they've got that confidence. Whereas I think the girls at A level sort of struggle a little bit when it comes to that transition from GCSE to A level, just due to the fact that you've got to be spontaneous, you've got to speak, even if you think you might be wrong. Whereas girls, sometimes they struggle with the idea of making a few mistakes, whereas boys are just happy to throw themselves into it. And I think that lends itself well to the A level curriculum, really.
And obviously we're speaking in a captured sort of generalized way here, of course, but as you say, and as you've stated, the data is there to support that gap, and it is a headline year after year. To add a kind of, I don't know, a physiological perspective there, as I look at it through my lens, that at Key Stage 4, girls reach peak height velocity up to potentially 2 years before boys do. And therefore that adolescence, puberty, the changes in the teenage brain, which we're seeing more and more documented more and more now, which is great, and like finding its way into curriculum design, this appreciation and understanding that the teenage brain is different to the adult brain. And at that stage, particularly Key Stage 4, we're not only dealing with teenage brains, we're dealing with girls' teenage brains, which potentially are 2 years more developed in body and mind than boys. Yeah,
totally appreciate that. And it's we've got to plan for that, haven't we? We've got to, when we're coming up with lessons that are trying to engage, which we're effectively differentiating with two sorts of different mindsets, aren't we? As you said, the girls are on a different level to the boys, and we've got to make sure that our lesson planning or curriculum design, as you said, matches that.
it's incredible, really, isn't it? Because it underlines the nuances of our craft as teachers. Because for earlier career individuals who might listen to this and think, goodness me, I'm spending enough time just planning what the lesson looks like from minute 1 to minute 40 or minute 50 or whatever, whatever kind of lesson time you're delivering. And then the more knowledge we gain and the more ability we have to kind of deliver those lessons, you just uncover these additional layers that need to be given, we need to really deliberately think about. And I certainly recognise in my classroom practice that year 10, year 11, Key Stage 4 GCSE curriculum is where I see the most significant step change in approaches between boys and girls. So on that, what do we do about it?
Well, there's a really good report that's out there from the British Council that I found in about 2020. It's a language-specific report, but it's all to do with there's a number of schools in the UK who are sort of bucking the trend when it comes to engaging boys in the classroom. It's specific to languages, but a lot of it is cross-curricular. And they came up with this sort of series of recommendations that teachers should be thinking about when it comes to planning the lessons, the activities within the lessons, and as you mentioned, the curriculum as well. So some of the things that they mentioned was one of them was rewards, having effective rewards for boys. Boys seem to respond really well to positive reinforcement and rewards. And I've encountered that over a number of years in my lessons as well. And I was responsible for dealing with sort of quite troubled boys, really, in a number of my classes. I'd often be given, or I'd often give myself as head of languages, the sort of weaker students, and that would usually be comprised of boys. So what happened was I took over, and this is where I'll talk to you about one idea I've got to share actually today. About a number of years ago, I was teaching a group of boys who had took over in year 9. There's 1 or 2 girls in the class, but it was generally a group of boys, and I took them over in year 9. So they were already turned off from languages. They didn't want to take languages further at all. But I knew the boys all loved PE and sport, and football in particular. So just getting to know them, I found like I was getting nowhere. Normally, I feel like that I can break through boys a little bit, and I can make connections and build up good rapport with them. But I was getting nowhere. So slowly, I started introducing things to do with sport into my lessons, and I came up with this rewards program, and I called it La Liga. And the idea was that because it was a Spanish lesson, that I separated the boys into teams, and I said to them that you're going to be representing a football team. So straight away they were interested in what was happening, and I said to them that every lesson you're going to have an opportunity to score a sort of fictional goal for your team. And the idea was that because the behaviour wasn't great, because they were all shouting out when they shouldn't be, they were talking over me quite a lot as well. They were talking over each other, and they didn't really have much pride in their written work. So what I said to them was that if we can ensure that we are listening when I'm speaking, or not talking when someone else is talking, or put your hand up when you want to contribute, then you can score a point for your team. So I gave them that incentive to sort of join in. And I said to them at the start before I actually started implementing it, I said, this is going to be a long-term reward, because I don't really like giving short-term rewards like sweets and things like that. I don't like doing that, because I think that it sort of creates more issues, doesn't it, than it solves. So I said to them, this is going to be a long-term reward. So I said, what would you like the reward to be after this 8-week series of lessons? So I said it was going to be over 8 weeks. And the boys said, what about cans of Coke in our last lesson? I thought, can I do that? And I thought, you know what, I'm going to do it. So last lesson of the term, I said to them, right, you can all have, the winning team is going to have a can of Coke, and you can have that can of Coke in front of everybody else in the classroom, and you can really rub their noses in it, but you've got to be the winning team. So straight away, because they'd established that that's what the prize was going to be, they came up with it themselves. I had that real buy-in straight away. So what I did was I incorporated that into my lesson. So every lesson, when the students walked into my classroom, there was a team emblem on the desk. So Barcelona, Real Madrid, Atletico Madrid, or whatever. So they knew they were in each team. They also bought these little captain's armbands as well. So one member of their team would be the captain for for that lesson, and they would score double points for that lesson. So it was just a way to engage them. So what was happening was the boys were they were engaged a lot more in the lesson. So I was still teaching the same lessons, but I was saying to them, right, well done, that's a brilliant answer, you've got a point for your team. And the more points they were earning, the more enthusiastic they became, to the point where the behaviour started. It was what was really surprising and brilliant from my perspective was the behaviour issues started managing themselves. So because it was a team game, and they knew that at the end of each lesson, or at the start of each lesson, I was going to show them the league table to where the league table was. They knew they had to look after each other. So some students would be talking, and you'd see one student nudge the other one and say, "You lose some points here. Don't be silly." And it just started managing itself. And over that 8-week period, the naughtiest students in that class were really engaged. They were working hard. They were taking a lot more pride in what they were doing. And it was just great to see. And as I said, I was just sort of facilitating the room at the end of it. And it wasn't necessarily, there were no behaviour issues. And it was something that just worked really, really well. And so that's something which I would say is probably one of the things I'm most proud of in my teaching career, really. Finding something that was engaging for a group of boys who were completely disaffected, didn't want to be there. Now, what I'm not saying here is that they became amazing linguists and took A-level and things like that. They didn't. But it made my lessons enjoyable.
Just bringing that aspect, I suppose what we're describing there, ultimately what we're describing is reward, which means we're discussing dopamine in the same way that they get such flooded with the stuff from their phones and from TikTok. But what I love the most that you've done there is you've added a time scale. Like you say, I'm not really into just dishing out sweets. There's a longevity to this. This is a medium term sort of goal setting, if you like.
Yeah.
That you've been able to assign via La Liga. That is, of course, bringing that kind of introducing that dopaminergic pathway, but in more of a less of an emotive and in the moment sort of limbic and more of a thoughtful, engaged, and clearly that worked.
Yeah.
Oh, go on. Sorry.
So I was going to say the only issue that I found was when once that 8 weeks was over, the students then thought, well, what are we doing now then? What's next? So I had to sort of come up with a sort of different slant on that, where I came up with I called it Le Magasin, which was a French lesson. What about I don't know what your French is like. That means shop. I'm sure you knew that. And what I did was I had these little euros, these little fake euros hanging around in our stock cupboard. So I thought, well, what I'll do is I'll try and use those. So I did the same premise happened. So I said, as long as you're behaving well and contributing and wanting to improve your French, then you can earn some euros. And then at the end of that 8-week cycle, I actually bought in sort of crisps and sweets and things, and they could buy things in French from the shop with all the euros that they'd earned over the course of that 8 weeks. So that was just another sort of interpretation of that, because they were expecting something after that as well. But yeah, again, that went down well as well.
A short pause in today's crafted conversation to talk a little bit about Keynote Educational, partner of the show. Keynote have been for the past 25 years the market leader for professional development for educators across the country. Keynote are the trusted provider of continuous professional development courses, conferences, in-school workshops, external examination marking support, and student revision courses. Their repertoire of speakers is extensive and impressive. I myself have and continue to support Keynote with courses across leadership and physical education. Their impressive range of courses covers the whole of the national curriculum, as well as looking at specific leadership within school settings, and those are even extrapolated out to the academic, to the co-curricular, and to the pastoral. So for further information, just head over to www.keynoteeducational.co.uk. Keynote, I'm sure, will be able to provide you with whatever it is that you need in the educational training environment.
I think people listening, there's always a fine line, in my opinion, I'm sure that others would support this, between lessons which are flashbang and gimmicky, often the type of lessons that you might see during an observation or something like that.
Yeah.
Certainly earlier in my career, and I'm sure there's lots of earlier career teachers listening that can recognise that within their own practice, and that which is curriculum design. And what I'm hearing here is curriculum design which is deliberately given consideration to those that are in front of you. The boys that are in front of you that were disaffective, were failing to engage properly in the class. And I think what I want to underline there is that there is in my opinion, strong distinction between what I class as curriculum design and just a sort of gimmick. You were creating an environment in which the vehicle was always the language, but you just altered the lens to be one that they could ascribe themselves to more easily.
Yeah. I mean, you've used a really key word there, the word gimmick. I think there's a lot of gimmickry, isn't there, in language classrooms, especially because we find a new website, for example, that might be interesting for students, but again, how does that play out in the classroom? What does that look like in your planning? There's lots of technological quiz-based websites, aren't there? Again, are I think introduced incorrectly quite a lot of the time into classrooms, whereas there's sort of a bargaining chip, aren't we? So if you do X, Y, and Z, then at the end we'll do a Kahoot. And it's like, well, what is there's got to be a planned purpose to this Kahoot quiz. There's got to be a reason why there's a need for that. Is it to check the understanding, or is it just to get through the last sort of 10 minutes of a lesson? And I think that you're right there, that it can be a gimmick. And I think technology in particular, I know we're going to talk about audio feedback a little bit later, but there is an issue there that people think that technology can just be a quick fix, and that can be, you don't have to think about the planning. You don't need to think about the way in which you're going to incorporate these ideas into your class. You can just do it and get the results. Whereas we know that's not the case.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to those online platforms, I personally don't use them lots. That's not that I have a problem with them, but as you say, I think it's the application and use of them. In many classrooms, my concern with those platforms is that they're being used as an educational TikTok. It's just a quick dopamine hit and a bit of fun, and not actually going, okay, we've done that, and now here's some immediate and actionable feedback that we can work on across the class, and we can take the live data in the room that says that only 60% of people have got question 4 right, whereas otherwise the average is 80% across all the other questions. What's question 4? Okay, it's looking at movement analysis of the shoulder. Let's spend a bit of time on that. Let's set a task, and kind of using that live information that is so valuable to drive our teaching, rather than it just being, as you say, a bit of gimmickry or just an extrinsic reward.
Yeah, I think what I love about those websites, though, I am quite a fan of them, because a lot of them provide you with a report, don't they, at the end of the quiz, which you can then use to plan. But most people don't use it. You just do it as a quiz. Don't actually take into account, as you said, any of the common misconceptions that are presenting themselves, and just move on to the next topic without addressing those issues. And I think that if those websites have got that capability, we've got to use it, I think.
Well, you could have a certain grammatical thing that gets drawn out, and you go, okay, this clearly is something that we need to go and work on. And now I'll back that with some sort of task orientation in the lesson, or some actual exam board questioning, and then mark scheme work. It's that quality first practice, isn't it? Of saying,
definitely.
How is this tool going to affect learning in my classroom?
Definitely, there's got to be a means to why you're doing things, and I always think that a lot of the time as well, in my experience, I mean, teachers haven't actually planned for those things to be part and parcel of the lesson. It's just that the students have put their hand up, or as the students have walked into the room, they said, "Can we do a Kahoot quiz? Are we doing something fun today?" And it's just seen as I said, a bit of a bargaining chip, which is wrong anyway, isn't it? In the sort of the power dynamics within a classroom, that shouldn't be happening anyway. But yeah, it's something which I think works well if it's introduced correctly, as we said.
Now, as you just sort of alluded to, the second area that you were interested to discuss today and looking forward to hearing about was specifically audio feedback, and actually how perhaps audio feedback marries itself quite nicely to the engagement of boys, particularly within our classrooms. So my first question really is, what do you, I would say audio feedback from my experience, both in school and through my own sort of consulting and professional development work, is limited in its use. Maybe that's just my perspective from my subject. So tell me, what's its purpose? Where does it sit within the range of feedback options that we have as practitioners?
Well, I've sort of been looking for something like this for a number of years, because I think in languages more than anything, when we give feedback, and if you think about the makeup of a GCSE language, for example, 25% of it is based around spoken language, isn't it? So in the classroom, when we're giving feedback on a speaking test, for example, historically we've been given feedback in written form. So you're giving feedback in written form to how students are produced or how students performed in their spoken language test, and you tell them how to pronounce things in a written form, and it's never sort of, it's never made sense to me. So it helps in that way. But I always think that when I think about providing feedback, I always have that image, and I can see myself in this as well. The depressing image in teaching, I think, is on a Friday afternoon when you see a teacher with a big stack of books walking out of the staff room with a really glum face on, knowing what's in store for their weekend. And marking is, I absolutely despise marking. It takes up too much time for very little reward. And I think that, well, you're in a good subject, aren't you, with regards to sort of written feedback. You don't necessarily have to do much. A lot of yours is oral, isn't it? But I think that there's nothing worse than, marking a set of books, especially, and you're sort of halfway through, and the students are all making the same mistake. And what you should be able to do is stop there, shouldn't you, and say, right, I won't bother wasting my time now. I'll focus on a really good start in my next lesson to address this issue that clearly exists. And like you mentioned in the introduction earlier on, I think what's really important is that we do look after our well-being and our teacher workload. And I think that audio feedback is something which I really think can be hugely impactful on our time. One of the things that I love using it for is in response to written work. So if a student has produced some written work, so again, I might take the books home, so 30 books I'll take home still. But instead of providing extensive written feedback, which, by book 30, your hand's falling off, isn't it? And you want to end it all. But with audio feedback, I actually enjoy giving audio feedback anyway. The students really appreciate the audio feedback as well. They seem to engage a lot more with it. And in my experience, when the student knows that they're just going to receive some audio feedback to a piece of work, they automatically are excited to receive that feedback and actually involve themselves in the feedback itself, which I've never seen before. I've never seen any students actively seek out feedback to improve. Do you want me to just discuss how the sort of format it takes? Would that be useful?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So
keep going.
A number of years ago, I came across a website called Quicker. So it's QWIQR. So it's all centered around QR codes. And all you do is print off some QR codes from the Quicker website, stick the QR code onto a student's piece of work, scan it with your mobile phone, and then you can record your audio feedback. And the sort of research that tells us that you speak 7 times faster than you write. So automatically you're going to be saving yourself time there. What I love doing as well is I love when I do provide audio feedback to students is I love reading the work of Dylan William. And through my work at Liverpool Hope University in higher education, I've been afforded a little bit more time to engage in a bit of research, which I really enjoy. And Dylan William talks about feedback being what we have to do with feedback is ensure that students are using that feedback. So we can't just give them the feedback and just expect them to, by osmosis, become better learners and improve. So we need to give them a task based on the feedback itself. So what I do in my feedback is I say, well, you've actually made a mistake on line 1 here, but you've made the same mistake on line 5 and line 7. Can you have a go at correcting that mistake? And because the students are listening to it, they can pause it, they can rewind it, they can do it a number of times. And it just, the students feel like that the teacher is in the room with them as well. And it feels so much more individualized, so much more bespoke to that student. And it just has such more of an impact on the students as well. The students also, or the research tells us, the weaker students, and again, this is where it ties in with boys, I think, especially in my subject, that because boys tend to find languages more difficult than girls do, the research tells us that boys engage more with verbal feedback than they do with written feedback, and they can often find written feedback very overwhelming. We often find, don't we, that when we're given written feedback, the more detail we go into, the better experience we're giving to our students, whereas the research tells us it's actually the reverse of that. So just getting the boys and girls as well, but I find it really does impact boys more, getting them involved in that process of receiving feedback and then actually doing something with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you say, and huge hat tip to the work on feedback that Dylan William does and the information that he puts out there for us as a profession, because it sort of spearheads the conversation around feedback, doesn't it? And I think in an era of education that we're in, teacher workload and teacher well-being is so important to stop the kind of revolving door of talented people leaving the profession, and ensure that we can entice talented people into the profession. And actually, from experience, engaging with variance in my feedback, I've found really motivating just as a professional. I enjoy the challenge of not just churning and burning out written responses that I feel completely demotivated by when it gets put in a folder or scanned over, or worse, it completely negated versus whatever letter or number is put next to the piece of work. And if it's a 7 and that's what they wanted, then great. Yeah, there's no engagement in the feedback anyway.
Yeah.
From a sort of from a cognitive perspective, of course, having a task to work on means that we're now working on that, asking our pupils to differentiate between different mistakes that they've made, recognize similarities and differences. That encoding process becomes deeper. It becomes a more affective process, which we know is going to allow that information to be drawn down far easier, because the processing is deeper.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely have to demonstrate a deeper understanding, don't we? When you're getting them to pick apart their piece of work, or even engaging with their peers, you might get them working in pairs. Getting them to look at each other's work and pick out those errors and things like that. But a lot of the research does tell us. I know that Daisy Christodoulou talks about a sort of deeper domain of learning, and the students can only demonstrate that if they're actually engaging in that feedback process and doing something with the feedback, as we said. One other thing I want to mention about audio feedback that I love doing is you don't often get those opportunities, do you, to sort of talk to your students and say how well they're doing, or to celebrate successes. Sometimes you might keep them behind, maybe at the end of a class, and say, you know what, you're doing so well, I'm really proud of you, you're doing brilliantly. Whereas through these QR codes, what I do is in the front of the exercise books, in the sort of the inner sleeve, I just put a little QR code there, and I put a QR code in and scan the code and give them a bit of feedback on how well they're doing. So I might say to them, do you know what, Marcus, you are doing so well this year. You've made a great start this year. You're putting your hand up all the time. The only thing I'd like to work on is extending your sentences. You're not really extending your sentences very well. And then if you work on that, then what I'll do is I can overwrite that code and say, do you know what, brilliant. 3 weeks ago, I gave you that target of improving your written work, and you've done that. Let's now focus on opinions. Let's give more opinions. And it's just a cumulative process. But it's just a great way of just checking in with the students and just giving them a bit of a confidence boost when quite often you need it. And especially with GCSE students who are, they're so busy, aren't they? They've got so many different subjects who are after their time. if you can just check in with them via these QR codes, then I think again it really does just give them that impetus to put a little bit more work in.
Well, there's a culture there that you can generate of an expectation, almost an accountability measure really, on you as the practitioner that says, my students are expecting to scan that QR code on the front sleeve every couple of weeks and hear something new, potentially. And so that forces you to deliver that individualized feedback, but also probably from either a subconscious or even better, more of a conscious and deliberate level, think about the learning design within your lessons to give them opportunities to demonstrate that progress that you've discussed.
Definitely. And when they get into the sort of the habit of you giving them that audio feedback as well, when they see that you've taken their books in and you've got that QR code in their books, straight away they're like, can we scan this code now? Can we do it now? And again, as I said before, you just don't see that enthusiasm to engage in feedback ever. So I think that's why I love using this audio feedback. A couple of other ways I've used it as well that I want to share. Postcards home. I'm sure you probably give loads of postcards home in PE. We used to give postcards home, but also we used to do phone calls home as well. But I think if we can use these QR codes with a postcard as well, you sort of you merge those two things together. So what we do is we'd give a bit of feedback to the parents on how well their students do in a very personal way that doesn't necessarily take up your time on a Friday afternoon ringing parents and then the parents not in, so you have to ring them on a Monday morning. It's that cycle of just wait. We said before, workload is an issue, isn't it? So doing postcards that way via these QR codes is great as well. And even just giving the students a little sticker with a QR code on that you record how well they've done that particular lesson, they can stick on their blazer, take home to their parents, and then they can scan that code and see how well they've done as well. So little things like that. I just think not only is it a positive for the students, but it does build that bridge between the school and the wider community as well, which I think is really important. Parents always, whenever I give those QR codes out as a postcard or a little sticker, every parent, even the parents, always mention it, and it's something which they really appreciate. So little things like that. I just think that just ways to encourage and infuse, and I said before, especially boys, because if they know they're going to get that positive feedback and ways to improve, then more than likely they're going to act upon it.
Do you know what? One thing that I'm processing there as you're discussing, clearly this is a highly valuable website that I need to go explore quicker, but also we're discussing boys. I'm also thinking this could add significant value to individualizing that feedback when we increasingly are seeing such learning and neurodivergence within our classrooms. So those with varying learning needs, and quite rightly, inspection processes are, both from an Ofsted and ISI, are increasingly foregrounding how are you catering to all individuals within your lesson. And I just see this as a huge tick in the box that says, this is how I am. This is how I'm delivering individualized feedback to my ADD, ADHD, whatever kind of neurodivergence we've got within our classroom, to say, here's how you are performing at your level, and here's how you can improve.
Yeah, you're spot on there. That it does lend itself so well to students who do need that support, because it's recorded. Because if you think about the cut and thrust of a classroom, especially in PE, if you think about your PE lessons, you're telling one student to do something, and over there you've seen another issue going on. You need to address that. So you're giving verbal feedback back and forth, and quite often once you've given that feedback, it's either lost, been misinterpreted, or the student's confused. Whereas if we deal with those students individually, as you said, and we give them that recorded feedback, they can, as I said before, they can rewind it, they can pause it, they can play it and ask you, what do you mean by this, and ask for a bit of clarification. But it's definitely lends itself well to those students who've got those additional needs, definitely.
Well, absolutely. Like we encode what we attend to, and if your attention is being drawn by the variety of things and experiences and distractions that are happening in the classroom, then that piece of verbal feedback is nowhere near as powerful as having it in audio form in a time that you got choice and autonomy about when you listen to it, how you listen to it, how many times you listen to it. You know, that the additional attention that can be paid to it is going to pay dividends.
Definitely. I think one.
Oh, go on.
Sorry, Marcus. I was going to say there are a couple of issues with audio feedback. If anyone listening is wanting to experiment with it, there are a few issues that you might want to contemplate before you actually start to introduce it into your feedback processes. And one of those is, students might not have a camera enabled phone at home, possibly, but on the website you can actually generate a little code or a website link that you can send via Google Classroom, which can be accessed by the students. The other thing is the research tells us that students have typically got a sort of 5-minute listening threshold. So just to be thinking about the sort of length of your recording as well, because students seem to sort of lose a bit of concentration around the 5-minute mark. The other thing is the tone of voice as well, but that's really important. So you've got to have a sympathetic approach when it comes to the tone of voice that you adopt in your audio, which can, I think, the beauty of audio feedback is that you can have that, which is sometimes lost in written formats. You might say something in written format which can be misinterpreted. So I think that's something to note as well with as an issue, but something which you can definitely see as a positive. And then the final thing I want to mention is issues with GDPR that people might be thinking about. So how do I know that a student isn't going to slag me off, for example, in their audio feedback when we engage in a bit of conversation via these QR codes? And I would say that there's a moderation button on the website, so you listen to it before you actually accept it and publish it onto the website as well. So there are things sort of within the website that sort of protect you as a teacher as well.
And that both stole one of my questions and also leads me nicely into my last couple. One was around building dialogue. From your experience, is that something that pupils engage with? Is that something that they tend to do in an audio dialogue back to you, be it through Quicker or be it through OneNote or however you deliver in that audio feedback? Or does it tend to be something that then happens in the classroom, if at all?
Yeah, I'm going to probably talk specifically about languages here, but because speaking is such a huge part of language learning, we can record Spanish questions and then the student can respond in Spanish via the Quicker app as well. So all they do is scan that same code, listen to my Spanish question and then answer that question, and I can give them, as a third strand to this conversation, I can then give them audio feedback on how well they pronounce things, any ways that they can improve that piece of spoken language, and it can develop from there. Obviously, it could go on forever, but you can actually put a stop to the conversation as you wish to on the website as well. But I think for language teachers especially, it just gives you a whole new dimension to your teaching, because historically we've never been able to give speaking tasks as homework tasks, because normally you need someone there with you to be able to conduct the conversation, but that's possible now, so we can definitely do that. But yeah, it's just definitely just giving us a completely new dimension to our teaching. I think that's something which we need to start embracing, I think, as teachers, because the technology is out there and I think the students love it. The reaction you get from the students is great. So I would really encourage everybody to experiment with it.
Yeah. And to make sure that we're not always, or I certainly will always make sure that I'm not just celebratory of the various discussions that we have within the podcast conversation, but also give a chance to sort of dig into the realities of different strategies. And from an audio perspective, I suppose my question is, how, in your experience, do you measure pupils' engagement with that feedback? Because the novelty of it and the inherent natural sort of rapport building that it offers is, unquestionable. However, what evidence is there that says this is actually impacting learning and demonstrably showing progress?
Yeah, I mean, there's two things there. Well, one thing I would say is that you can visibly see it. So I've only got anecdotal evidence here in my experience. So you can see the enthusiasm from the students is one thing, that they really want to engage with the feedback. But to ensure that they are engaging with the feedback that you're giving them, what I like to do is I like to give them you can have a little bit of fun with audio feedback as well. So what I do is within their audio feedback, I might say to them, for example, this is brilliant work, etc. And then I might say Boris Johnson's underpants as a random phrase. And then the next day I'd say to them, what was your random phrase in your audio feedback that I gave you? And if they couldn't tell me, then I knew that they hadn't engaged with that feedback. So I'd say, you need to go away and you need to make sure you're engaged with that feedback that's taking me lots of time to record. And I'd like you to listen to it, because the reason why I'm doing it is to try and get you to improve. So there are different ways you be creative in ensuring that the students are engaging with it, because with written feedback, obviously you cannot do that, can you?
No. And how might an assessment policy run in tandem?
So with an assessment policy, what I would suggest is that it can't. What this can't do is this can't replace your feedback policy. So this is not to say, this is a good idea, and I would suggest that you go away and everything is now audio feedback. That's not what I'm suggesting. But as you alluded to earlier, that variety in feedback is the key to keep students enthused and keep them engaged in that feedback process. So I would say maybe once a half term, you might give them some audio feedback around how well they're doing, or in response to a particular piece of writing. But as I said before, all I can give is anecdotal evidence on the experience and the sort of the enthusiasm the students have for it. And it's as professionals, we've got to be willing to try different things out, I think. And I think that because the technology is out there to be able to get students to engage on a different level with feedback, I think we've got to at least experiment with it and see if it works for us. It might not work for everybody. I'm not saying that this is the answer to everybody's feedback issues, but in my experience, it's completely revolutionized how we feedback, to the point where our speaking exam results were the 4th worst skill. So out of 4 skills, it was the worst skill. We did something about it by giving students audio feedback on how to improve their pronunciation, their intonation, etc., and it became the 2nd strongest skill. So, and that was over a couple of years. So you can see there that it does have impact, but I don't think there's been enough research around it as of yet. But it's definitely something which, as a teacher of 16 years, is something which I'm so glad that I've discovered, because it's just completely revolutionised how I feedback to my students, and they really appreciate that.
Jonathan, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate your insights and the conversation today.
Thanks, Marcus. Great to see you. Take care now.